14 months after my wedding never happened, a judge repeated my fiancé's own words back to him in a federal courtroom. After tomorrow, anything she says will sound like revenge. Everett Lane stared at the defense table while the judge explained why those words mattered. They proved he had not made one desperate mistake. He had built a plan around destroying my credibility before anyone could examine what he had done. 8 months have passed since that hearing, but I still remember the night before my wedding more clearly than the day he was sentenced. I remember the hotel's ice machine grinding at the end of the hall. I remember the sweet, heavy smell of white roses leaking from the family storage suite. I remember the green exit sign washing the carpet beneath my shoes as my younger sister laughed behind a closed bedroom door. Then I heard Everett say, "Tomorrow she'll be the laughingstock in front of 200 guests. Before I take you into that room with me, I hope you're doing well. Stay with me, because what they planned for my wedding exposed far more than an affair, and please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what happened next." The rehearsal dinner had ended 20 minutes earlier. Most of our guests were downstairs in the hotel bar, and the bridesmaids were supposed to be helping Sloane finish the welcome bags. I was walking back to the ballroom because the seating chart folder was missing its final update. That detail probably tells you more about the woman I was then than any description could. I had a wedding planner. I had an assistant. I had competent people around me. Yet when one page went missing, I left my own rehearsal dinner to fix it myself. I had spent 12 years doing the same thing at Bright Harbor Outreach. I found the mistake, closed the gap, and protected everyone else from the consequences. I called it responsibility. Other people learned to call it Camille will handle it. Everett had texted me 10 minutes earlier. "I'm exhausted, so I'm going up to the suite. I'll see you in the morning." Sloane had kissed my cheek near the ballroom doors and announced that she was taking the bridesmaids downstairs for one drink. Her perfume had lingered on my skin after she walked away. Neither of them was where they claimed to be. The family storage suite was at the far end of the 7th floor. We had filled its sitting room with garment bags, flower boxes, extra favors, and the emergency supplies my mother insisted every wedding required. The main door had not latched completely. A strip of warm light crossed the hallway carpet. I reached toward the handle, intending to close it, when I heard Sloane laugh. It was not the polished laugh she used during interviews or donor dinners. It was lower and breathless, the laugh she had used as a teenager whenever she believed she had taken something from me without being caught. I stopped with my fingers inches from the door. "You should have seen her checking the centerpieces," Sloane said. "She still thinks tomorrow is about marrying you." Everett answered, but his voice was muffled. I moved closer without touching the door. Through the narrow opening, I could see part of the sitting room. Everett's white dress shirt hung over the back of a chair. Sloane's silver heels rested beside the bedroom doorway. One of her earrings lay on the carpet near his cuff links. I did not need to see anything else. For 3 years, Everett had slept beside me, planned a future with me, and told me my suspicion of easy charm was the result of working too long around damaged systems. My sister had stood beside me during dress fittings, adjusted my veil, and promised she had never seen me happier. The affair was brutal, but it was also simple. People betray you because they want something more than they value you. What I heard next was not simple. "Will the board actually believe it?" Sloane asked. "They won't have time to question it," Everett said. "The video goes up during the tribute. We show the special operations account, the transfers, and those clips of Camille ordering everyone around. That account was approved. The guests won't know that." A bed frame shifted against the wall. I pressed my palm against the cold wallpaper to steady myself. Sloane lowered her voice. "What if she shows Naomi the invoices? After tomorrow, it will sound like revenge. She'll be the abandoned bride accusing her fiancé and sister because she lost control in front of 200 people. Sloane laughed again. "You really think she'll lose control?" "I'm counting on it." My fingers went numb first. Then a hard ringing filled my ears, swallowing the hum of the ice machine. Every muscle in my body pushed me toward that door. I imagined throwing it open. I imagined Sloane grabbing a sheet and Everett reaching for the calm expression he used whenever he wanted me to doubt myself. I imagined breaking a glass against the wall, shouting loudly enough to bring the entire floor running. For one breath, I wanted to give them exactly that scene. Then I caught my reflection in the dark glass of a framed hotel print across the hall. My face was pale, but my shoulders were straight. Behind my reflection, the open doorway waited like a trap. Everett had just told Sloane what he needed from me. He needed rage without context. He needed witnesses who would remember my reaction more clearly than his accusation. He needed me to become the unstable woman in the story he had already written. I stepped away from the door. Inside the room, Sloane said, "By this time tomorrow, she'll have no fiancé, no board, and no way back into Bright Harbor." Everett replied, "Then the forensic review becomes her failed attempt to punish us." The words changed the shape of everything. 6 weeks earlier, Bright Harbor's audit committee had approved an independent forensic review of several consulting and media invoices. I had requested it after finding payments that did not match the work delivered. Everett had called me cautious. Sloane had accused me of trying to make her campaigns look frivolous. Now they were planning to frame me for moving donation money before that review began. I walked to the service alcove beside the elevators and opened the notes application on my phone. I wrote the time, the room number, and every sentence I could remember. I did not start an audio recording. I did not know whether recording a private conversation from the hallway was legal, and I would not hand Everett away to turn my evidence into another accusation. My hands shook hard enough that I mistyped his name twice. I corrected it, reread the note, and emailed a copy to myself. Then I went back to my room alone. I locked the door, placed my phone on the desk, and stood in front of the mirror. My wedding dress hung behind me in its garment bag. The veil my mother had cried over was folded across the chair. I allowed myself exactly 1 minute to understand what I had lost. When that minute ended, I opened my laptop. An email notification appeared before I reached the event portal. Wedding Tribute Final uploaded by Sloane Reed. I owned the portal account because I had signed the contract with the hotel's audiovisual vendor. Everett had teased me for insisting that every wedding file go through one place. Sloane had complained that the upload process was too formal. Neither of them had remembered that the system notified me whenever a new folder arrived. I clicked the link. The upload history showed Sloane's account, the exact time, and a folder far larger than a finished tribute video should have been. Inside were dozens of raw clips, draft edits, spreadsheets, rehearsal recordings, and a file labeled Play at Ceremony. I opened that one first. My own face filled the screen beneath a black title card, where the missing donations went. The video opened with a close shot of me sitting at the end of Bright Harbor's conference table. Someone had removed the voices around me, leaving only my expression as I reviewed a report. Without context, I looked cold and impatient. The next clip showed me telling a program director, "No, move it back immediately." The original conversation had been about donor money placed in the wrong account. In Sloane's edit, it sounded as though I were ordering someone to hide a transfer. A soft piano track played beneath her recorded narration. My sister always said she protected Bright Harbor, but over time, protection became control. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. Several rows were enlarged and highlighted beneath the words, "Special Operations Account." The edit suggested I had moved donation money into a private fund only I could access. The account was real, but the accusation was not. Our audit committee had approved it to separate restricted housing funds from general operating expenses. 3 people could authorize payments. Every transaction required supporting documentation. The video removed those details. It ended with Sloane facing the camera, her eyes wet and her voice trembling with practiced disappointment. We did not want to believe someone in our own family could betray the people who trusted us. I closed the video before the final title appeared. For several seconds, I sat without touching the keyboard. Everett and Sloane had not prepared an emotional accusation. They had constructed a false explanation around real documents, knowing that truth mixed with deception was harder to challenge than a complete lie. I reopened the event portal and examined the project folder. I did not delete anything. I did not rename a file or open the editing software connected to the project. I downloaded copies to my laptop, preserved the original folder names, and photographed the upload history with my phone. The system showed Sloane's account, the time of the upload, and every item included in the transfer. She had meant to upload one finished video. Instead, she had uploaded the entire working folder. Buried beneath the drafts was a directory labeled Community Campaigns. I opened the most recent clip. Sloane stood beside a woman holding a box of food outside an apartment building. A young boy pressed against the woman's coat while the camera operator adjusted the frame. Sloane handed her the box and waited. The woman thanked her quietly. Sloane lowered her smile. "Can we do that again? This time, let yourself feel it." The woman looked confused. "I'm grateful." "I know," Sloane replied. "We just need the audience to see it." They repeated the exchange. On the third attempt, the woman began crying. Sloane wrapped both arms around her while the camera moved closer. The moment the camera operator called the scene finished, Sloane stepped away. An assistant took the box from the woman and carried it back toward the production van. My throat tightened. I paused the video before the child turned toward the camera. I had no reason to study his face. Whatever Everett and Sloane had done, I would not turn that family's humiliation into evidence for my own satisfaction. Another clip showed the same boxes outside a different building. A production assistant moved them between vehicles while Sloane changed coats to make the footage appear as though it had been recorded on separate days. I had spent years defending her campaigns because they brought attention to Bright Harbor. I had corrected inflated numbers, removed photographs taken without proper approval, and warned her that donors deserved accuracy. Each time, she had apologized. Each time, I had repaired the report and kept the incident away from the full board. I had believed I was protecting the organization. In reality, I had taught my sister that I would always clean the floor after she tracked mud across it. I returned to the project folder and opened a recording labeled "Eat It Review." Everett and Sloane sat together in a small production room. The camera faced them from across the desk, apparently forgotten after a remote meeting. Everett pointed at a spreadsheet on the monitor. "Crop everything below this line," he told her. "They only need to see the transfer." Sloane leaned closer. "What if she shows the board the invoices?" "After tomorrow, it will sound like revenge," Everett said. "No one trusts the woman screaming after her fiancé leaves her at the altar." Sloane smiled at the screen. "I don't want her quietly resigning. I want them to see her lose everything in the room she paid for." That sentence removed the last excuse I might have made for her. Sloane was not a lonely woman manipulated by a dishonest man. Everett had given her a method, but the cruelty belonged to her. I called Elaine Porter, the attorney who had reviewed my employment agreement and the wedding contracts. She answered on the fourth ring. "Camille, do you know what time it is?" Elaine asked. "I need you to listen without interrupting." I told her where the files came from, what I had seen, and what Everett planned to show the following afternoon. Elaine's voice sharpened. "Do not access either of their personal devices. Preserve only what was uploaded to your account. Send me the portal confirmation and the original folder." My next call was to Naomi Brooks, chair of Bright Harbor's audit committee. Naomi listened, then asked, "Have you opened any bank records tonight?" "No." "Have you contacted a vendor?" "No." "Keep it that way," Naomi said. "You are now personally involved. You cannot conduct the financial review yourself." We arranged to meet before sunrise in a private conference room at the hotel. Before closing the folder, I noticed one final slide buried beneath the video graphics. "Camille Reed has agreed to step down pending review." I had agreed to nothing. The file information showed it had been created 3 weeks earlier, before I requested the formal forensic review, and long before Everett could claim the wedding confrontation had forced him to act. My phone rang again. Naomi did not greet me when I answered. "Do not confront them," she said. "And Camille, do not sign anything tomorrow. Not even a marriage license." By 5:30 the next morning, Naomi Brooks, Elaine Porter, and I were sitting in a windowless hotel conference room with untouched coffee between us. I showed them only the clips that mattered. Everett directing Sloane to crop the spreadsheet. Sloane demanding that I be humiliated publicly. The slide, claiming I had agreed to resign. We skipped every unnecessary image of the families Bright Harbor served. Naomi closed the laptop. "The forensic review continues through the outside firm. You cannot direct it now." "I understand. You will also recuse yourself from every board decision connected to these allegations. That decision would leave my career in other people's hands. But investigating my own fiancé and sister would give them another reason to question the result." "Put it in writing," I said, effective immediately. Elaine drafted the notice while I contacted the officiant. Reverend Paul Mercer met me near the service elevator, still wearing jeans beneath his clerical shirt. "The ceremony can look however you choose," I told him, "but there will be no legal marriage." Our license had not been signed. Nothing had been filed with the county. I asked him not to pronounce us married, bless the union, or touch the paperwork Everett expected to sign afterward. Reverend Mercer studied my face. "Are you safe?" "I will be once today is over." He agreed to remain nearby, but not participate unless I called for him. I kept the ballroom open because nearly 200 guests had already traveled to attend. More importantly, Everett and Sloan planned to accuse me in front of donors, employees, and board members. If I disappeared before they played the video, they could release it later without my response and claim my absence proved guilt. Back in my suite, I removed Everett's access to the wedding expense account. The bank agreement allowed either account owner to suspend secondary access before the marriage. I did not move his money or touch anything registered in his name. I packed my passport, laptop, medication, employment records, and the jewelry my grandmother had left me. Elaine placed my engagement ring in an evidence envelope and locked it inside her portable case. There was no dramatic moment. I did not throw it across the room or leave it on Everett's pillow. The ring was property connected to a dispute, and I was finished making emotional decisions for people who depended on me to behave irrationally. At 7, Elaine and I met the audiovisual manager, Daniel Cho, inside the control room. He preserved the original upload, copied the system logs, and changed the access code so only his staff could enter. We prepared a short response using the unedited footage. Daniel removed every frame that showed a child or identifiable program participant. The clip contained only Everett, Sloan, the editing screen, and their own voices. "The tribute video runs until the first accusation appears," I told him. "Then stop it." "How long?" "Long enough that no one can claim I invented what they intended to show." I wrote 3 rules on hotel stationery and folded the page into my pocket. I would not accuse anyone of financial crimes before the independent review reached a conclusion. I would not expose the people our organization served. I would not let Everett or Sloan provoke me into physical contact. By 8:30, my wedding gown still hung untouched by the window. I changed into an ivory pantsuit with a narrow silk blouse and low heels. I had chosen the outfit for the farewell brunch, but it felt more honest than walking into that ballroom dressed as Everett's bride. My mother entered without knocking. Vivian stopped when she saw the gown in its garment bag. Her eyes moved to the suit, then to Elaine, standing beside the desk. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making sure nothing legal happens today." Her face tightened, but she did not ask why. That told me more than surprise ever could. "You cannot make a scene in front of the donors," she said. "Bright Harbor will not survive another public scandal." "I haven't mentioned a scandal." "Camille, please. Whatever you saw, we can discuss it privately after the reception." "Whatever I saw." I looked at the woman who had taught me that family problems should be handled behind closed doors, especially when the wrong daughter caused them. "How long have you known?" I asked. Vivian glanced at Elaine. "This is a family conversation. It stopped being private when someone prepared a video for 200 people." Her composure cracked. "Sloan made mistakes, but she cannot lose the organization. She has built her entire life around it. And I haven't? You have skills. You have a career. You can survive losing him." Her voice dropped. "Your sister cannot survive losing everything." She knew I was about to lose Everett. She knew before I told her about the affair. Music began drifting through the wall as the ballroom doors opened downstairs. Vivian reached for my wrist. "If you walk in there, you will destroy this family." I removed her hand and opened the door. "No, Mom. I am walking in because you already did." When I entered the ballroom alone, nearly 200 people turned toward me. The string quartet faltered for half a measure. Guests who expected a bride in a white gown saw me in an ivory pantsuit, carrying no bouquet and walking without my mother. Everett stood beneath the floral arch in his tuxedo, wearing the expression of a man who had just discovered something terrible. Sloan hurried toward me first. "Camille, are you all right?" she asked loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Her eyes moved past me, searching for Vivian. My mother had entered through another door and taken her seat near the front. She would not look at me. At the time, Everett mistook my calm for shock. He thought I had discovered the affair and lost the ability to act. He did not understand that I had already cancelled the only part of the day that could legally bind me to him. Before the quartet could begin again, Everett took the microphone from its stand. "There is something everyone needs to see before we continue," he said. "I wish this could have remained private, but too many people have trusted Camille." Several board members exchanged glances. Naomi sat near the center aisle with her hands folded on the table. Daniel Cho was inside the audiovisual booth, waiting for my signal. Everett looked directly at me. "I loved you enough to ask questions." What I found broke my heart. Sloane moved beside the screen, positioning herself where the photographer could capture her reaction. The ballroom lights dimmed, and my face appeared above the words, "Where the missing donations went." The edited clips made me look secretive and controlling. A cropped spreadsheet showed transfers into the Special Operations account. Sloane's narration claimed I had created a private fund and blocked anyone who questioned me. A donor at the front table lowered her program. One employee stared at the screen, then at me. Everett watched the room instead of the video, measuring whether the lie had begun to work. The presentation reached the enlarged transfer that omitted the audit committee's approval. I raised 2 fingers, and Daniel stopped the video. The ballroom remained dark as I walked toward Everett. He held the microphone against his chest, but released it when the security supervisor stepped closer. I faced the guests. "You promised these guests a show. I hope they enjoyed it." Everett's mouth tightened. Sloane's rehearsed sadness disappeared. "I will not ask anyone here to accept my version of events," I continued. "You should hear the people who made this video explain it themselves." I nodded toward the booth. The screen changed to the raw editing room footage. Everett appeared beside Sloane, pointing at the same spreadsheet. "Crop everything below this line," he said on the recording. "They only need to see the transfer." A murmur moved through the tables. The next clip showed Sloane directing a charity shoot. The woman receiving assistance and her child were blurred, but Sloane's instructions were clear. She demanded repeated tears, repeated gratitude, and a better camera angle. When filming ended, an assistant carried the food box away. A longtime donor removed her name badge and placed it face down on the table. The final clip showed Everett leaning toward Sloane. "After tomorrow, anything Camille says will sound like revenge." Sloane smiled on the screen. "She'll clean it up. She always does." No one applauded when the footage ended. The silence was heavier than outrage. One bridesmaid stepped away from Sloane. A board member closed his laptop and stood. 2 representatives from a corporate sponsor left without speaking to Vivian. Everett reached for the microphone. "This is edited too," he said. She had access to the system. "The original upload and system logs have been preserved by the venue," I replied. "An independent forensic review will determine every financial fact. Not me, and not anyone standing in this ballroom." I turned toward the guests. "There will be no marriage today. No marriage license has been signed, and none will be filed." Everett moved toward the audiovisual booth. Security blocked the aisle before he reached the first table. Naomi stood from her seat. "Under Bright Harbor policy, the Audit Committee has placed an emergency hold on relevant system access and payments pending a formal board vote. No conclusion has been reached, but the records will be protected." That was all she said. There was no public verdict and no accusation beyond what the footage had already proved. As guests began leaving, Marcus Hale, Bright Harbor's finance director, approached with a folded printout. His face looked gray. "I brought this because 3 approvals carrying my name never appeared in my account," he whispered. "Those vendors are not the only problem." He opened the page between us. Near the bottom was a payment to Everett's consulting company. Beside another transfer, someone had typed 2 initials. The initials were SR. The emergency board meeting began Monday morning without flowers, cameras, or anyone pretending we were still a family. Everett, Sloane, and Vivian joined through separate attorneys. Their access to Bright Harbor's financial systems, donor records, and public accounts had been suspended under the organization's existing policies. Naomi reminded everyone that the suspension protected the records and did not amount to a finding of guilt. When the board reached my position, I stood. "I requested the original review, but I am now personally involved," I said. "I will leave while you decide whether I should retain any authority during the investigation." Vivian's attorney looked surprised. He had expected me to fight for control. Sloan had already posted that I was using a broken engagement to seize the organization our mother built. I walked into the hallway and waited beside a row of framed photographs from Bright Harbor's first 10 years. In most of them, Sloan stood beside Vivian while I appeared somewhere near the edge, holding a folder or speaking to an employee. 20 minutes later, Naomi called me back. The board had placed me on paid administrative leave from decisions connected to the audit. I could answer questions and provide records, but I could not direct the review, contact suspected vendors, or recommend disciplinary action. I accepted the restrictions without argument. Naomi introduced Daniel Ross, the forensic accountant appointed by the audit committee. He was a quiet man in his late 40s who carried one laptop and no visible interest in our family history. He began with the account Everett had used in the wedding video. "Who created the special operations account?" he asked. I proposed it. The board approved it 8 months later. "Who could authorize payments?" Naomi, the finance director, and me. 2 approvals were required. I gave him the resolution, monthly statements, and the internal policy governing restricted funds. The account held donations designated for emergency housing. We had separated that money so it could not be used for payroll, marketing, or general expenses. Daniel reviewed the signatures before looking up. The wedding video made this appear privately controlled. That was the intention. "It was not privately controlled," he said. "But your name appears on almost every correction connected to Sloan's department." That was harder to answer. I told the board about attendance reports I had corrected without documenting formal violations. I admitted that I had ordered campaign photographs removed when consent forms were missing, then allowed the matter to end there. I described an inflated production invoice I had negotiated down rather than sending to the audit committee. None of those actions put money in my pocket. They still mattered. "I thought reporting every incident would damage donor confidence," I said. "I believed fixing the problem protected the programs." Naomi folded her hands. "It also protected Sloan from consequences." She was right. I had not stolen from Bright Harbor, but I had helped create the conditions that allowed someone else to believe rules were temporary obstacles I would quietly remove. Daniel spent the next 3 days comparing contracts, invoices, incorporation records, and payment approvals already held by Bright Harbor. He did not have private bank records or secret government access. He worked from documents the organization legally possessed and public corporate filings anyone could purchase. By Thursday, he had identified 3 vendors with different names but nearly identical paperwork. Their invoices used the same unusual spacing. 2 listed the same mailing address. All 3 used one contact number. The newest company had been formed 17 days before receiving its first Bright Harbor contract. The payments had started small, then increased after Everett's consulting company lost a major client. One invoice charged Bright Harbor for strategic media placement. Daniel could not find a purchased advertisement, media schedule, or performance report. The public registration named a former employee of Everett as the vendor's representative. The connection was not yet proof that money had returned to Everett. It was enough to demand deeper examination. Then Daniel opened the expense file marked SR. It described a community ambassador retreat designed to improve donor engagement. The attached receipts showed a luxury resort, private spa services, expensive meals, and a 2-person suite. The dates matched a weekend. Sloan had told us she was visiting potential sponsors. A hotel confirmation listed Everett as the second guest. Sloan had approved the invoice herself. She had also submitted a reimbursement request for clothing, transportation, and personal services under the same campaign code. I had spent 2 days wondering whether Everett had used my sister's hunger for recognition to pull her into something she did not understand. The approval logs ended that possibility. Sloan had not merely benefited from Everett's scheme. She had signed her name beneath it and called the benefit charity work. Daniel closed the folder. "This is no longer an internal employment matter," he said. "The board has to make a referral." Sloan went live before the board had finished preparing its referral. She sat in front of a cream-colored wall with no makeup, except enough to make her eyes look swollen. The wedding footage had shown her planning my humiliation, but she spoke as if she had been another casualty. "I made terrible choices because I trusted the wrong man," she told her followers. Everett convinced me Camille was stealing from the organization. My sister knew I was vulnerable, and instead of helping me, she used my wedding speech and private conversations to destroy me in front of everyone. It had been my wedding, but Sloane had already rewritten that detail. She described me as cold, controlling, and obsessed with running every part of Bright Harbor. Those accusations worked because they contained pieces of truth. I did control too much. I often delivered decisions without explaining how I reached them. I had spent years correcting people instead of trusting them to correct themselves. None of that made her invoices honest. Elaine called before the live stream ended. "Do not respond online," she said. "Anything you post can become part of the dispute." So she gets to lie while I stay silent? She gets to make statements that can later be compared with records. Let her. That advice did not make silence easier. By evening, strangers were calling me jealous, unstable, and cruel. Several clips removed Everett entirely and made the story look like a rivalry between two sisters. My relatives joined the pressure the next morning. An aunt I had not spoken to in 8 months called to remind me that Vivian had devoted her life to charity. A cousin said, I should settle privately before my mother's health suffered. No one asked whether I was sleeping or whether the man I had planned to marry had used my wedding to frame me. Vivienne sent one message. Donors are leaving because of what you did. Your sister cannot afford her attorney. Think about the family before more damage is done. I checked the information with Naomi rather than accepting my mother's version. 3 donors had temporarily paused new commitments. 2 had requested copies of the audit findings when completed. 1 corporate partner had offered to fund emergency services directly during the review. Bright Harbor was under pressure, but it was not collapsing because I had exposed the video. I replied to Vivian with one sentence. I will not pay anyone's legal expenses. For years, refusing her would have made me feel selfish. This time, it felt like returning a responsibility to its owner. The staff meeting later that week was worse than the online attacks because the people in that room had trusted me. Naomi led the meeting while I sat at the end of the table as a witness, not an executive. Employees asked about program funding, job security, and whether donor information had been compromised. Then, a communications coordinator named Marisol looked directly at me. You knew Sloane used photographs without complete consent forms last year, she said. Why did you only make her remove the posts? The room went still. I could have explained that the families were protected once the images were deleted. I could have said we were weeks away from a major campaign and feared losing funds. Both statements were true, and neither answered her question, because I believed avoiding a public scandal protected the organization. I said, I corrected the immediate problem and chose not to document the violation formally. That was the wrong decision. Marisol did not soften. You protected Sloane. Yes. Admitting that did not make me responsible for her fraud, but it made my own failure impossible to hide behind competence. 2 days later, Bright Harbor's outside counsel received a call from Lena Ortiz, a freelance production coordinator who had worked on several of Sloane's campaigns. Lena did not contact me. She sent her information through the attorney because she wanted a documented process. Her production logs showed repeated takes of families receiving the same boxes. Equipment records confirmed that identical supplies had been moved between locations. One entry noted that Sloane ordered the crew to delete footage after a participant asked whether the food was actually theirs to keep. The logs did not prove where the donation money went. They proved the deception in the videos had been deliberate and repeated. I remembered reviewing those campaigns and thinking they looked too polished. I had dismissed the discomfort because Sloane handled media and I handled operations. Departmental boundaries had become another excuse not to ask difficult questions. The most painful evidence arrived from our own email archive. 6 months before the wedding, a board member had warned Vivian about rising production costs and missing documentation. Vivian replied that the matter should not be brought before the full board yet. Camille will correct it, she wrote. There is no reason to damage Sloane's reputation over paperwork. A second email had been sent 3 days before the wedding. We must protect Sloane from a scandal she will not survive. Camille has the experience and strength to recover. My mother had turned every quality she praised in me into permission to sacrifice me. Naomi then issued a preservation notice to everyone involved. The instruction was simple. Do not delete, alter, or destroy emails, documents, messages, or files related to the review. The next morning, the system recorded a large deletion from Vivian's account. Someone had removed old emails and edited the minutes of a committee meeting. The automatic backup preserved the originals, so nothing was truly lost. The attempt itself remained visible. Vivian's longtime assistant, Claire, called the board's attorney before noon. She said Vivian had asked her to clean up old drafts and replace one version of the meeting minutes with another. I was in Naomi's office when the attorney finished speaking with Claire. He removed his glasses and placed them on the table. "Camille," he said, "your mother may have just turned herself from a witness into a defendant." 3 months passed before the financial records began answering questions the wedding footage could not. Bright Harbor continued under an interim executive director appointed by the board. My name remained on the staff directory, but my authority stayed limited while the investigation moved forward. Sloane's office was cleared, and her gold nameplate disappeared from the hallway. I kept my engagement ring sealed in Elaine's evidence envelope because neither of us wanted Everett claiming I had damaged or sold it. During those months, I attended counseling, met with worried donors, and watched several employees leave rather than wait for the organization to regain its footing. Every departure reminded me that exposing wrongdoing did not erase the damage caused before the truth surfaced. The investigators interviewed me twice. The first session focused on the timeline from my discovery of the suspicious invoices to the night before the wedding. I provided emails, board resolutions, calendar entries, and the original portal notification showing Sloane's upload. The second session was harder because it focused on my own decisions. An investigator named Rachel Kim placed several corrected campaign reports between us. "You changed these numbers after Sloane's department submitted them," she said. "Yes. But you did not file a formal incident report." "No." "Why?" "I believed correcting the figures quickly would protect donor confidence." Rachel did not accuse me of participating in the fraud. She also did not allow me to hide behind good intentions. "We are not asking you to appear flawless," she said. "We need to understand how inaccurate information remained inside the organization without reaching the board." I told her the truth. I had grown accustomed to fixing Sloane's mistakes privately because public confrontation always became a family crisis. Vivian would say Sloane was overwhelmed. Sloane would accuse me of resenting her visibility. I would correct the report and return to work because that seemed easier than fighting the same battle again. My choices had not created Everett's companies or approved Sloane's personal expenses. They had made Bright Harbor easier to exploit. The bank records arrived later through the legal process. I did not see the private documents as soon as they were collected. Daniel Ross explained the findings after the relevant information became available to Bright Harbor's attorneys and after I was authorized to review the portions connected to my work. The path was simple once the accounts were placed side by side. Bright Harbor paid 3 vendors for media strategy, donor outreach, and campaign production. Those vendors transferred money into Everett's consulting company. His company then paid overdue office rent, business debts, legal bills, and personal credit cards. Other payments covered Sloane's resort stay, stylist, luxury transportation, and clothing she had described as campaign expenses. Everett had called the transfers consulting fees. The invoices described work no one could prove had been completed. The strongest document came from his own company files. Daniel opened a spreadsheet and turned the laptop toward me. 4 columns appeared across the screen. Actual cost, invoice amount, S share, company repayment. The letters beside Sloane's name appeared again and again. On one campaign, the actual production expense was less than half the amount billed to Bright Harbor. Everett's company received the difference, then transferred Sloane's share through a personal services payment. He had recorded the scheme as though he were tracking ordinary business commissions. Could he argue this was an accounting mistake? I asked. Not when the same structure appears across multiple contracts, Daniel said. And not with these messages. Sloane's texts removed any remaining claim that she had been a passive participant. She complained that Everett's first proposed share was too small because her face attracted the donations. She told him to raise the production invoice rather than reduce her payment. In another message, she wrote that Bright Harbor would never have received the money without her audience, so taking a percentage was not stealing. Everett warned that I had begun asking questions. Sloane replied, "Keep Camille busy with the wedding. Once she is married to you, she will protect the family before she protects herself. I read the sentence twice. Sloane had not fallen into Everett's scheme after beginning an affair. She had used my engagement as part of their timetable. While I reviewed menus, guest lists, and hotel contracts, she helped approve agreements designed to drain the organization. She understood one thing about me accurately. Before that weekend, I had protected the family even when doing so required me to ignore my own judgment. She failed because she believed I would continue after learning the full cost. The investigators also recovered the draft announcement, claiming I had agreed to resign pending review. Its creation date was 3 weeks before the wedding. Everett had written the first version. Sloane suggested adding language about my emotional instability. Vivian's comments were more polished. She replaced removing Camille from operations with protecting donor trust during a difficult family transition. She changed financial misconduct to unanswered concerns regarding internal controls. My mother had helped turn their attack into the language of responsible leadership. Elaine called me one afternoon and asked me to come to her office. A federal indictment connected to the Bright Harbor investigation had been unsealed and was now part of the public record. I sat across from her while she placed the document on the desk. Everett Lane appeared first. Sloane Reed appeared beneath him. The charges described the alleged transfer scheme, false invoices, and use of electronic transactions to conceal the money. The third name was separated from theirs by several lines, but that distance changed nothing. Vivian Reed was listed as the third defendant. My mother had not received the stolen money. She had allegedly altered records and directed an employee to destroy emails after the preservation notice. I had once believed the worst betrayal occurred in that hotel suite. The indictment showed me the truth. Everett and Sloane had planned to destroy my future, but my mother had chosen to help them erase the evidence afterward. 5 months after the wedding, Everett, Sloane, and Vivian appeared in federal court for their arraignment. They arrived through separate entrances with separate attorneys. No one was dragged across the courthouse steps in handcuffs. They entered pleas of not guilty, surrendered their passports, and accepted release conditions while the case moved forward. Outside, reporters repeated the phrase, "Charity Dynasty," until it sounded like the name of something that had never existed. Everett's attorney spoke first. He said Everett had been an outside consultant who relied on information provided by Bright Harbor's leadership. According to his version, Sloane controlled the campaigns, approved the vendors, and directed how money should be spent. He described Everett as a businessman who had trusted the wrong client. The argument might have worked if Everett had not kept such careful records. His spreadsheet showed actual costs, inflated invoices, Sloane's share, and payments into his failing company. Bank records traced money from Bright Harbor, through the vendors, and back to him. Messages showed him warning Sloane whenever I asked questions. He had designed the system, monitored it, and expanded it. Calling himself a consultant did not change that. 2 weeks later, Elaine received a letter from Sloane's attorney. Sloane wrote that Everett had recognized her insecurity and used it against her. She said she had never understood the accounting structure and believed the extra payments were legitimate compensation for the donations her campaigns attracted. She asked me to provide a statement confirming that she had always struggled with financial documents. The letter included 4 pages about our childhood. She remembered borrowing my clothes, following me to school, and waiting for me to help with homework. She described me as the sister who had always protected her. She never mentioned the woman who had been forced to cry for the camera. She never mentioned the food boxes taken back after filming. She never mentioned standing beside Everett while he prepared a video designed to make me look like a thief. Elaine placed Sloane's messages beside the letter. In one exchange, Sloane rejected Everett's proposed payment because it was not enough. "My face brought in that money," she had written. "Raise the production invoice. I am not taking less than 20%. I gave Elaine my answer. I will not provide any statement that contradicts the evidence. Sloane called me cruel online that same evening. Vivian waited longer. She called from her attorney's office and asked whether I would speak with her as a daughter rather than as a witness. Elaine remained beside me while I accepted. My mother sounded smaller than I remembered. "I did not take money," she said. "I was trying to protect Bright Harbor. You tried to delete records after being ordered to preserve them. I was removing drafts that could be misunderstood. You told Claire to replace the meeting minutes. Silence filled the line before Vivian changed direction. Sloane was terrified. You have always been stronger than she is. The sentence no longer hurt in the same way because I finally understood what it meant inside our family. Strength had never earned me protection. It had made me the safest person to sacrifice. You keep saying I was strong enough to survive, I told her. That was how you justified choosing me every time someone had to absorb the damage. I am still your mother, and I am still the daughter you helped frame. Vivian asked me to write that she had acted out of fear for the organization. She did not ask me to lie directly. She wanted me to soften the truth until responsibility disappeared inside good intentions. I will not ask the court to punish you as harshly as Everett, I said. But I will not protect you from what you chose to do. The backup system resolved the last dispute over her role. It preserved the emails Vivian had ordered deleted and both versions of the committee minutes. Claire's testimony matched the timestamps. The original minutes recorded concerns about vendor payments. The replacement removed Everett's company and changed a warning about missing documentation into a general discussion about campaign costs. Vivian could no longer present herself as a mother confused by complicated finances. She had understood enough to know which words needed to disappear. The plea negotiations took several more months. Everett eventually admitted that he had created the vendor network, inflated invoices, and used electronic transfers to route money into his company. He agreed to restitution and forfeiture terms while accepting responsibility for the central fraud charges. Sloane admitted that she approved false expenses, received personal benefits, and participated in the plan to conceal the payments. Her agreement did not describe her as an innocent influencer manipulated by a sophisticated man. Her own messages had made that impossible. Vivian admitted that she directed the destruction and alteration of records after receiving the preservation notice. Her responsibility was narrower than theirs, but it was independent. Each of them had tried to use me one final time. Everett wanted my silence to support his claim that this was a family dispute. Sloane wanted my protection to become proof that she lacked intent. Vivian wanted motherhood to reduce in order to destroy evidence into an emotional mistake. I refused all three roles. After the pleas were entered, a victim liaison contacted me. Bright Harbor would submit its financial losses, but I could also provide a personal statement before sentencing. "What do you want the judge to understand?" she asked. I thought about my wedding gown sealed inside a garment box. I thought about Everett's affair and Sloane's laugh behind the hotel door. Those injuries belonged to me. But they were not the greatest harm in the case. I opened a blank document and began typing. My name is Camille Reed, and the Harbor Homes Emergency Housing Program entered last winter with $43,000 less than donors had provided. The courtroom where Everett, Sloane, and Vivian were sentenced was smaller than the ballroom where they had tried to destroy me. There were no flowers, cameras, or carefully arranged tables. The walls were plain, the benches were hard, and every sentence spoken carried a consequence that could not be edited afterward. That was 8 months ago, the day I mentioned at the beginning of this story. When the court called my name, I walked to the lectern with 3 pages in my hand. Everett watched me from the defense table. Sloane kept her eyes lowered. My mother looked directly at me, as if she still expected me to recognize a silent request only daughters were supposed to understand. I began with the Harbor Homes Emergency Housing Program. The program entered last winter with $43,000 less than donors had provided, I said. That amount represented hotel rooms, security deposits, transportation, and emergency childcare for families who had nowhere safe to go. I spoke about employees who had been pressured to sign inaccurate reports. I spoke about donors who had trusted Bright Harbor to use restricted funds as promised. I spoke about mothers and children whose most vulnerable moments had been filmed, repeated, and edited into promotional content. Then I spoke about myself. For years, I corrected smaller violations without documenting them formally because I believed avoiding scandal protected the organization. My silence did not create the vendor network or authorize the false invoices, but it helped create a culture where certain people expected consequences to disappear. I did not ask the judge for the maximum possible punishment. I asked for restitution, meaningful accountability, and restrictions preventing any of them from managing charitable funds again. When I finished, I returned to the bench behind the prosecutors. I did not look at my family until the judge began with Everett. The judge described him as the architect of the scheme. He had created the vendor network, monitored the transfers, and used Bright Harbor's money to support a company already collapsing under its own debts. Everett's attorney argued that he had accepted responsibility and lost his business, reputation, and future marriage. The judge answered that a failed business was not a license to steal from emergency housing funds. He also noted that Everett had not merely betrayed an organization. He had used his relationship with me to anticipate questions, delay scrutiny, and prepare a public attack against the person most likely to discover what he had done. Then the judge repeated Everett's words from the editing room recording. "After tomorrow, anything she says will sound like revenge." Everett's shoulders lowered as the sentence was announced. He received 6 years and 8 months in federal custody, followed by supervised release. He was ordered to participate in restitution with the other defendants, and assets connected to the scheme were subject to forfeiture. His company had already closed. His clients had already left. The sentence established that his downfall was not an unfortunate business failure. It was the consequence of deliberate fraud. Sloan was called next. Her attorney described her as emotionally dependent on Everett and inexperienced with financial matters. He argued that Everett had recognized her need for approval and manipulated it. The judge acknowledged Everett's influence, then opened a folder containing Sloan's messages. "My face brought in that money," the judge read. "Raise the production invoice. I am not taking less than 20%. Sloan began crying before he reached the messages about the wedding. The judge said manipulation did not explain why she negotiated her share, approved personal expenses, or demanded that I be humiliated rather than privately removed. Her conduct showed both financial intent and personal cruelty. Sloan received 2 years and 4 months in custody, followed by supervised release. She shared responsibility for restitution and was prohibited for an extended period from serving in a fiduciary, fundraising, or financial management role for a charitable organization. She had spent months presenting herself online as a woman deceived by a dangerous man. The public record now included her own admission that she had helped him. Vivian was sentenced last. Her attorney emphasized that she had not received the stolen money. He spoke about her age, her decades of community work, and the organization she had helped establish. The judge agreed that her role differed from Everett's and Sloan's. Then he described what she had done after receiving the preservation notice. She had ordered emails removed. She had directed an employee to replace meeting minutes. She had used her authority as a founder to hide warnings that could damage Sloan. The judge looked toward my mother. Believing one daughter is stronger than another does not give a parent the right to offer that daughter as the family's sacrifice. Vivian closed her eyes. She received 6 months in custody, followed by 6 months of home confinement and supervised release. She was also prohibited from holding a governance role in a charitable organization. When the judge asked whether she understood, Vivian answered yes. Then she turned toward me. Her expression held the same expectation I had seen throughout my childhood. She wanted me to stand, object, explain that she had acted from fear, and make the punishment smaller. I remained seated. Outside the courtroom, Sloan was permitted a brief moment with her attorney before being escorted away. She stopped near me, her face wet and colorless. "Everett destroyed my life," she whispered. I did not raise my voice. "You helped him build the weapon." She stared at me as though I had denied her something she was still entitled to receive. Then she turned away. Everett looked in my direction once. I gave him no final words. He had already received years of my trust, my home, and my future plans. I would not give him a memorable goodbye he could carry as proof that he still occupied space inside me. Naomi waited for me near the courthouse entrance. The afternoon air felt sharper than it had when I entered. Reporters stood behind the barriers. But Naomi guided me toward a quieter side hallway and handed me a thick envelope. "The board voted last night," she said. Inside was a formal resolution. Bright Harbor Outreach would no longer operate under the Reed family's symbolic control. The organization would receive a new name, an independent governance structure, and permanent representation from the communities it served. For the first time, our family name would not appear above the entrance. I looked at Naomi. She tapped the final page of the resolution. Will you stay long enough to help us rebuild it without your family? 6 weeks after the sentencing, I stood beneath the empty space where my mother's portrait had hung for almost 20 years. The board had removed every photograph that presented Bright Harbor as the achievement of one family. In their place, the renovation team had installed a temporary white wall while employees and community representatives decided what belonged there next. Naomi's question outside the courthouse had been simple. Would I stay long enough to help rebuild the organization without my family? I agreed to remain for 1 year. I did not become chief executive officer. I did not ask the board to restore every authority I had held before the investigation. An independent search committee hired Helena Foster, a nonprofit executive who had no connection to the Reed family, our donors, or the scandal. I returned as chief operating officer under a written division of responsibilities. I could manage programs, staffing, and service delivery, but I could not approve major contracts alone. Helena could not override financial controls without review. Neither of us controlled communications, accounting, and vendor selection at the same time. Before the wedding, I would have considered those limits inefficient. Afterward, I understood that a system designed around one dependable person was still a dangerous system. It only appeared safe while that person remained honest, healthy, and capable of carrying everything. The organization also received a new name. The board chose Harbor Community Network after collecting suggestions from employees, donors, volunteers, and families who had used our programs. My surname disappeared from the website, the entrance, and the annual report. Vivian later wrote that removing the Reed name erased decades of her work. She was wrong. Her work remained in every housing placement, every meal delivered, and every family helped. What disappeared was the belief that public service belonged to the people whose names were printed above the door. The new board included a former program participant, a housing advocate, an accountant, 2 employees, and community members, with no social connection to our founders. Finance and communications reported through separate chains. Vendor contracts above a fixed amount required competitive bids and independent approval. Every media campaign needed clear written consent. Participants could withdraw that consent without losing services. No family was asked to repeat tears, gratitude, or private details for a camera. If their stories helped raise money, the campaign had to provide a direct and documented benefit to them. Those rules should have existed long before Sloan abused the absence of them. Restitution did not restore everything at once. Some money had already been spent. Other assets took time to sell or recover. Insurance covered only part of the losses, and several donors waited for audited reports before returning. Harbor Homes reopened 12 emergency placements during the first quarter. We restored transportation assistance next, then weekend childcare. The organization remained smaller than it had been before the scandal, but the numbers in our reports finally matched the help delivered. Marisol, the communications coordinator who had challenged me in front of the staff, agreed to stay. I'm not staying because I trust the name, she told me. I'm staying because the system no longer asks us to trust a family. I thanked her rather than defending myself. During my first full staff meeting after returning, I apologized for the part I had played in protecting the wrong kind of stability. I corrected violations without recording them because I wanted to avoid disruption, I said. That kept programs moving in the moment, but it also kept patterns hidden. From now on, we document the problem even when the person responsible is talented, popular, or related to someone powerful. The apology did not repair every relationship. Some employees accepted it, others remained cautious. A few had already left and did not return. That was part of accountability, too. I could change my behavior without demanding that everyone immediately trust me again. I continued therapy and began leadership coaching. I learned to delegate decisions without secretly preparing to redo them. I stopped treating every mistake as something I had to absorb before anyone else noticed. When an employee brought me bad news, I thanked them for reporting it instead of asking why they had not fixed it first. The change felt uncomfortable because control had always looked like competence from the inside. Everett wrote to me from prison 4 months after he was sentenced. He said some part of him had genuinely loved me. He claimed fear had changed him into someone he no longer recognized. I gave the letter to Elaine and did not answer. Whatever Everett had felt, he had measured my habits, used my trust, and built a plan around my expected silence. Love that required my destruction was not a love I needed to interpret. Sloane's letter arrived 2 weeks later. She wrote that she had lost her career, her followers, her home, and the future she believed she deserved. She asked whether I was satisfied. I was not satisfied by her suffering. I was relieved that she could no longer use vulnerable people as scenery or charitable money as personal compensation. Those were not the same emotion. I kept her letter with the legal records and sent no response. Vivian requested a visit after completing the custody portion of her sentence and beginning home confinement. I told her I would consider meeting after my therapist, and hers agreed it could be productive. The meeting would include a professional, and we would not discuss money, the organization, Everett's sentence, or ways I could help Sloane. My mother called those conditions cold. I called them specific. I had spent too many years believing that a boundary was cruel unless the other person approved of it. Now I understood that boundaries existed precisely because approval could not be trusted. On the morning the new sign was installed, I stood in the lobby with Naomi, Helena, Marisol, and several community representatives. No member of my family attended. The wall where Vivian's portrait had hung now displayed the names of our programs and the neighborhoods they served. Beneath them was a simple statement promising transparent records, informed consent, and independent oversight. I thought about the night outside that hotel room and the moment Everett said I would become the laughingstock of my own wedding. I had smiled, but not because I already had a perfect plan. I smiled because I finally understood what they needed from me. They needed anger they could edit, silence they could exploit, and loyalty they could turn against me. That night, I stopped giving them the right to choose my response. They promised 200 guests a show. What they gave them was evidence. The show ended that night. The consequences did not. When people use your patience as permission to betray you, you do not owe them silence, protection, or another chance. Protect records, ask for independent help, and respond only when you understand the facts. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. It is how you stop others from making you responsible for their choices. You can admit your own mistakes without carrying crimes that are not yours. Real strength means choosing truth, even when family pressure demands loyalty to a lie.